Tecmo Classic Arcade is a 2005 video game compilation that was released exclusively for the original Microsoft Xbox. So yeah, screw you, you PlayStation 2 owners, and with your Street Fighter Alpha anthologies and your Mega Man X collections. We got Tecmo Classic Arcade, brother, and only on Xbox! And originally sold around these parts for an outrageous $49.99, plus tax. Far more costly than what other compilation sets sold around the same time, which was somewhere within the $20 to $30 range. $50 though? That's how much you would pay for a new game on the console, not a collection of old ones. And it was for this reason alone that I shied away from this collection way back when for about 3 years, until the price dropped to a more manageable $19.99, or rather 2 for $30 as the price tag would suggest. So not even that. Tecmo Classic Arcade boasts 11 Tecmo arcade games, including Pinball Action, Pleiades, Riger, Senjo, Solomon's Key, Star Force, Strato Fighter, Swimmer, Tecmo Bowl, Tecmo Cup, and Bombjack. Originally they were supposed to include the Ninja Gaiden arcade game and round the package out to 12 games, but somewhere along the way they decided to put the game as a hidden feature in the remixed Ninja Gaiden Black game. Anyways. 11 arcade titles. And for something that they initially charged you $50 for, you would think that there would be some high quality stuff in here, stuff that's worth the price of admission. That's probably not the case when it was originally released and charged for that high price tag. At a much cheaper price, it would be worth it. But there are a couple quirks that keep it from being an absolute must-have. But let's quickly go over the games themselves before we go any further. From the cover, the main draw of Tecmo Classic Arcade would have to be Tecmo Bowl, and the arcade game, which originally used 2 monitors to achieve a widescreen effect, is here in all its glory. However, as technically impressive as the arcade game may be, it's not exactly the game that most old school players have fond memories of, but rather the NES game of the same name that came afterwards. Or rather, the game that came after that, or something. Meh. On a technically superficial level, it doesn't seem that bad of a game, and 4-player games could be a fun time, but I was never a big fan of football or football games in general, so it does nothing for me. However, it might be something some of you folks might enjoy. Or maybe not, since it's not the game you actually wanted or something. I don't know. Aside from that, there are a couple other games worth mentioning, such as Bombjack, the Pac-Man-esque game where you have to collect all the bombs and avoid all the baddies. It's a fun little game with power-ups scattered about, and is a good enough time killer. You got Ryguard, a side-scrolling action fantasy game where you control some dude with a cutting thing and must fend off against a bunch of bad guys that will come at you in droves. This has little to do with the NES game of the same name, but it's still a fun time to be had by all, even if overwhelming at times. There's Star Force, a fairly simplistic yet thrilling space shooter that served as the template for Hudson Soft's memorable Star Soldier series of space shooters. And speaking of shooters, there's Strato Fighter, another shooter where you can shoot both forwards and backwards by flipping your ship around. It's a nice little feature. And how could I forget the majesty that is Pinball Action, with its multiple boards and its use of the triggers to control the flippers. I may be over-exaggerating in that regard, but I can't say I didn't have fun with this, because I did, so it gets a nod. Beyond that, however, the rest of the games are really nothing special. Solomon's Key might bring back memories for some people, and is a fairly playable game, but Tecmo Cup, not so much. Especially when the original arcade game was a tabletop game, had trackballs, and as such, doesn't translate too well on the analog setup. I'd much rather be playing this with a computer mouse than an Xbox controller, to be honest. Battlezone, I mean Senjo. Well, I guess I'm being a bit harsh here because at least Battlezone lets you move the damn tank around instead of just moving the turret. And I guess as long as any stray shots or incoming ships only hit the turret, I'm fine. It's not a bad piece of work visually. I kinda like the parallax involved. But it just makes me wish I was playing some other game, like Battlezone. Pleiades is an old school shooter which shares similarities to the title arcade game Phoenix. And in all honesty, I could never get into Phoenix. I prefer Demon Attack on Atari 2600. Anyway, there's a planetary defense level. There's a level with big swooping birds. There's a level with an enemy base. And a level where you land the plane. Ass! This is probably the oldest game in the pack, and not exactly one of the best efforts. Swimmer. What? So that's your lineup of classic titles that they thought was worth $50, huh? And they wonder why nobody bid back in the day before the price dropped on that deal. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a couple decent games here, and a couple potential favorites, but compared to what other compilations of the time had been delivering in terms of quality and quantity, and for a much cheaper initial retail price, Tecmo Classic Arcade felt rather lacking. Only a handful of the 11 games are fondly remembered, much less worth playing, and I also feel that using Tecmo Bowl as a selling point was a bit deceptive on Tecmo's part, considering it's the lesser arcade version and not the superior and much more popular NES version that people really wanted to play. Hell, I think people would have bid on this if they actually had included Ninja Gaiden Arcade as originally intended. But on the other hand, it did grace the Wii Virtual Console in 2000X, along with a number of games featured on this disc. Oops. Well, I suppose I could talk about the emulation of the games themselves, which is actually pretty good. Controls rather well, all things considered. It sounds and looks the part. A lot of these games have weird aspect ratios on display, so you have somewhat of a generic blue background to fill the empty space, but you could sort of manipulate the size of the screen to your liking. Tecmo Bowl is the only game that I feel has an issue in regards to finding a proper display, because it originally used two monitors, so it's basically this small rectangle, and if you try to make it full screen, you'll lose part of the image. As per the case, most games have, you can toggle the difficulty and other settings as applicable to each game. I will admit though that I always found the controller mapping on this thing to be a bit awkward. Most notably, pausing the game is done by pressing the Y button rather than pressing the start button, which just starts the game. That is after you insert a coin by pressing X. I guess that was worth $50 to replicate that authentic experience. Every game in this pack uses the A and B buttons exclusively, with the exception of Pinball Action, which wisely uses the trigger buttons to control the flippers. After a while you get the hang of it, it's not that hard to get used to. But still, it would have been nice to be able to remap the buttons to one's liking, but such an option does not exist in Tecmo Classic Arcade. That probably would have cost more money. There's also some additional content where you could check out some flyers and stuff for the various arcade games. It's not bad. It's the thought that counts, I guess, I suppose. Yeah. If this was a review being done in 2005, back when this thing would cost $40 to $50 to buy, then Tecmo Classic Arcade would not have been worth the money, with only 11 games on hand, and possibly a smaller number of those titles actually worth playing. Meanwhile, you had collections of the time, such as the Capcom Classics Collection, Midway Arcade Treasures, and Title Legends among a couple, that were jam-packed with about 20 to 30 games, a good balance of well-known classics and hidden gems, and some turds, some extra browsing material for good measure, and they only cost a few bucks on top of that. Nowadays, since this is a hell of a lot cheaper, I'd say it might be worth picking up if you're into classic arcade games or the like, or if you just like collecting these compilation sets. There's nothing in here that can be considered heavy hitters, standouts, or anything of the sorts, but the games are varied even if only some of them are worth playing. Overall, if you enjoy collecting compilations, I'd say go for it, why not? But otherwise, you've got better options. That's all I'll say. Good night.